welcome back. You know, one of the first places I go for show prep is cnsnews.com, and I quote them often on this program. The editor-in-chief is Terence Jeffrey. He's been around a long time. I mean, Pat Buchanan campaigns. He's been a journalist, columnist, and the rest of it. And he joins. He's got a new book out called Control Freak, 7 Ways Liberals Plan to Ruin Your Life. Terry, first of all, welcome to you. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Good. Only 7 ways?
Well, there was only so much time, you know.
That is true.
If I had more time, I would have picked more ways. But I really tried to boil it down to ways where I think the liberals already have or are planning imminently to really put the government in serious control of people's lives in some ways that really matter.
Well, one of the ways, of course, it hits close to home to me is what you listen to on the radio. The fairness doctrine, eventually this is going to rear its ugly head again, is it not?
Well, it is. I think it'll come in a different form than it did the last time around. In the book, one of the chapters is speech, and I say that liberals are trying to use government to control our speech, and I point out how Elena Kagan and President Obama have demonstrated they have absolutely no respect for the First Amendment. So there's no principle standing in their way. They've clearly demonstrated that they believe government can restrict political speech. But I do go through the history of how the government has regulated radio over the years, starting with the original Radio Act back in 1927, which was followed up by the Federal Communications Act. And I tell you, it's very interesting. When they passed those original pieces of legislation, you had Republicans and Democrats together in Congress saying the one thing we can't do is censor speech on the radio. We can't regulate speech. Now, there were some people in Congress, both Republicans and Democrats, but in a minority who thought they should regulate speech on the radio, but they were defeated. And it wasn't the Congress, it was actually the bureaucracy under FDR, when there'd been a one-party government for 8 years in 1940 that started really clamping down on radio speech. And it actually said they couldn't editorialize on the radio in the early 1940s. And it wasn't until Reagan came in and we had an FCC that Reagan had dominated with his appointees that they rolled back the fairness doctrine and we got free speech. Democrats would like to bring it back.
Right, yeah, because right after that we got Rush Limbaugh and the explosion of talk radio, so of course they'd like to bring it back.
Exactly. That's exactly what happened. And they don't like the kind of talk they hear on talk radio because it's conservative. But what they're looking at doing now is redistributing the ownership of radio stations. They know they can't get the fairness doctrine reimposed through Congress. There aren't the votes. But what they'd like to do is have the FCC shorten the length of a broadcast license from 8 to 3 years, insist that there be local content, have sort of these local community action type police listening in on radio stations and then complaining to the FCC that they're not serving the local interests of the community because of what they're talking about on the air, and try and yank licenses away from their current owners and give them to people who will do the kind of talk that the liberals in government want.
Yeah, we'd have these Acorn Brown shirts out there listening to every radio station in the country trying to get their license.
That's what they're doing, and that's the plan that they have. In fact, the Center for American Progress, a liberal think tank here in Washington, did a study a few years ago called Structural Imbalance in Talk Radio, where they claimed that if you looked at radio stations that were owned by groups that own chains of radio stations, they tend to have more conservative talk than stations that were individually owned. And they try to use that as building an argument for quite literally taking the ownership away from those folks and giving them to people who will talk the way the liberals in government want us to talk on the radio.
Well, because they figured out, the big chains have figured out that conservative talk radio makes money and people listen to it, and liberal talk radio does not. I mean, look at Air America. I mean, how many incarnations do we have of that until finally it went under? Nobody wanted to hear it. And that's not my fault. I mean, that's just the market working, is it not?
That's right. They don't win in the free market.
That's right.
But I think their ultimate strategic aim in that particular front is they want to preserve their power in government. The liberal establishment media wants to help them preserve their power in government. And talk radio is the avenue that we get out information that is not going to get out through the liberal press. And you know, it's CNS News. A lot of our product gets out to people through talk radio as well as the internet. They'd like to shut us all down. That's the bottom line. They really would. And I think we need to watch very carefully what the Obama FCC does, because I do believe they're going to go in this direction of trying to redistribute ownership of radio stations.
One of the other things you say is they wanted to determine how many kids you have, and you talk about iPad the IPAT equation. Explain that to our listeners.
Yeah, this is an amazing thing. John P. Holdren is the director of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. He's President Obama's top advisor on science. But he's also one of the founding fathers of the environmentalist movement. And back in the early 1970s, he got together with Paul Ehrlich, who's the guy who wrote The Population Bomb.
And has been wrong every time.
Has been completely, absolutely, utterly wrong. But Holdren and Ehrlich got together, and they came up with this formula, which they, under the acronym IPAT, which stands for Environmental Impact equals population times affluence times technology. And they said this is how you define the environmental degradation of the planet. They defined environmental impact, which they sometimes call damage, as a decrease in the longevity or quality of life of people alive on the planet today or future generations. And they said that decrease in longevity or quality of life was going to come about by any increase in the population, which was the P in their formula, the affluence, which was the A, or the technology was the T. So they had this neo-Malthusian. This is the president's top science advisor. This guy developed this ideology, the IPAT formula, that said if you have the economy grow and the population grow, it's going to make the human race worse off.
Right. Well, the thing about it is rich people and rich countries are better stewards of their environment than poor countries and poor people. It's just, and it makes sense, too. I mean, you have the resources to be able to be clean.
Right. And this is another place where they totally reject the free market and the blessings of the free market. And, the logical consequence, which I'll say, they very candidly stated back in the 70s when they first started writing about this, of their formula is that in order for the world to be fair, because you have all these lesser developed countries where people have a really low standard of living, and because we can't grow the economy because that would destroy the planet, what we need to do is redistribute wealth both within the United States and globally. And they called for President Obama's science advisor, John Holdren, called for a massive campaign to, quote-unquote, de-develop the United States.
That's right.
And transfer a lot of our wealth to third world countries. This is a guy, right now, this is a control freak sitting right at the left hand of Obama in the White House today.
That's been their whole thing. And really at the root of this environmental movement, and I'm not talking about the people who want to recycle and keep the earth clean, because I happen to be one of those too. I mean, it's a fine thing to do. But the base of the radical green movement is about population control. And every time you turn around, now Al Gore is finally starting to come out of the closet on this and espouse his true feelings. He thinks there are too many people. Well, the thing about it is, they don't think there are too many of them. They think there are too many of us.
Right. They think the planet is okay for them and a few of their friends and close family members.
Right. The rest of us got to go.
The rest of us are a blight on the planet. And, if you go back, I remember Ronald Reagan gave that great speech where he talked about the Soviet Union being the evil empire. And he talked about Whittaker Chambers, his former Soviet spy who wrote this great book, Witness, who talked that there really was one struggle, the communists who were materialists who believed in man, and Western civilization who believed in God and God's rules and God's order. Well, if you believe in God and you believe in the traditional understanding of God the way Western civilization and the way the people of this country have, you understand that this planet was given for us to use in an ordinate and proper way. But it was, in fact, given to us, and we do, in fact, have dominion over it. The environmentalists are akin to the communists in the sense that they don't believe that. They have a materialist approach to the world, and they believe that we are a problem for the planet.
We're a virus.
And we have to mitigate. We're a blight. And that's and I explain that in the book, and I talk about how that contrasts with the vision of the Founding Fathers and why it drives these guys to most especially want to control our property, but also to want to control our reproduction.
Right. We've been working on a documentary called An Inconsistent Truth that should be out before too long. And one of the scientists we talked to, he says, look, this notion, they think that humans should have no impact on the planet, but what they fail to understand or fail to acknowledge is that every living being has an impact on the planet. For instance, trees. Trees, as they grow, choke out the sunlight for the smaller shrubs and smaller trees around them, therefore they can't grow. So if trees have a right to do this, why don't humans have a right to change their environment that helps them thrive in the best way? And when you put it to some of these folks like this, they think that trees have more of a right than human beings to exist on the planet. And that's really what it boils down to. As you said, we're a blight or a virus or whatever it is you want to call it. But these people think that there are too many of us, and some of us have to to go. Now, the question is, how are they going to go about doing this? And I think what they do is go about doing this is not allowing the third world to develop, Terry, and then they automatically just starve off.
Well, I really, I agree with you. They don't believe in humanity, and they have this bizarre view of nature, and it is a dangerous philosophy. It is a dangerous philosophy, and in this book, Human Ecology, that Holdren co-wrote with Paul and Ann Ehrlich back in 1973, that I discuss in my book, they actually said that society may need to entertain compulsory means of population control.
That's right.
And Holdren is now, he's backed off of that since then, especially when he went up for his confirmation hearing. But they wrote it in plain black and white letters in their book back in 1973 because of this vision that they had.
That's right.
And, it's a very anti-human vision, and it's an anti-freedom vision, because in order to carry out the things that they think are necessary to preserve the planet, you have to put all kinds of power in the hands of government to control the activities of the human race. And I think I do a pretty good job in my book of explaining how this wonderful economist from the University of Illinois, he's deceased now, Julian Simon, completely, absolutely destroyed and rebutted this neo-Malthusian argument that Ehrlich and Holdren put forward, absolutely, utterly destroyed it, and explained how human beings really are the ultimate resource. It's the imagination, the hard work, the spirit of freely acting human beings that actually makes this planet a great place to live and actually improves the planet. And I think Julian Simon demonstrated that in very clear and compelling terms, which I summarize in my book, in contradiction to Mr. Holdren.
Yeah, right, and you do that and so much more. It's called Control Freaks: 7 Ways Liberals Plan to Ruin Your Life. I'll show it for the TV audience out there. It's by Terence Terry Jeffrey from CNS News, editor-in-chief. And a great website, by the way, Terry, because as I said at the beginning of this, it's the first place I go. And you guys do a remarkable job in finding great stories out there. A lot of times, days before other people are talking about, or sometimes you're talking about things and you write about things that people never end up talking about, except for us on talk radio. So we appreciate the resource.
Thank you very much.